Okay, so far we talk about digital signature algorithm, and now we talk about elliptic curve cryptography. Let's combine it and talk about elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. So elliptic curve digital signature algorithm, ECDSA, is the elliptic curve analog of the DSA algorithm, digital signature algorithm. So elliptic curve digital signature algorithm was first proposed in 1992 by Scott Vanstone in response to NIST request for public comments on their first proposal for DSS. It was accepted in many standards, actually, like 1998 as an ISO standard, ANSI standard, IEEE standard, and it is also included in many standards in the last 2 decades. As I mentioned before, the current NIST actually documentation removed DSS or DSA and prefers elliptic curves instead of the standard digital signature algorithm. So let's do the analog between elliptic curve digital signature algorithm and the digital signature algorithm. Since this is about elliptic curves, when we choose domain parameters, we have to choose an elliptic curve. Let's start with this. So the domain parameters for elliptic curve digital signature algorithm consists of a suitably chosen elliptic curve E defined over a finite field FQ of characteristic P. So P is the prime number. So either P equals to Q, so P is a large prime, or Q equals to power of 2. In that scenario, characteristic becomes 2. So you choose a base point G on this elliptic curve. Domain parameters may either be shared by a group of entities or specific to a single user. So this means that, for instance, when you want to communicate with 5 people, you can choose 5 different elliptic curves or parameters and do different operations with all of them. Or simply, you can choose as domain parameters first and say that with everybody else, I'm going to use these parameters. And this is actually what cryptocurrencies does. This is why I talk about Bitcoin elliptic curve, because once you choose it, you say that let's use it by everybody else. So this is why whenever you create an wallet address, everybody knows what the domain parameters are. Okay, let's see how this works. So domain parameters are as follows. There are many actually. Let's start with the first one. A field size Q where either Q equals to P or an odd prime where Q equals to 2 to the M. Okay, so either odd prime, a large prime P, or 2 to the power of M. An indication FR, field representation of the representation used for the elements of FQ, because you have to fix the representation so that we understand what kind of field representation you are using. Optional, a bit string seed E of length at least 256 bits if the elliptic curve was generated in accordance with random generation methods. So random elliptic curves is a common practice. In some communications, you can say that, okay, let's randomly choose an elliptic curve. Okay, so if you do this, then you have to show your seed value just to show that, you didn't choose a bad elliptic curve and you didn't put a backdoor in. 2 field elements A and B in FQ, which define the equation of the elliptic curve E over FQ. Like for the case of large primes, the elliptic curve is represented as y square equals to x cubed plus ax plus b. So this was the representation I used so far. But if you choose your characteristic as 2, which means that your q equals to 2 to the m for some value m, then your elliptic curve becomes y square plus xy equals to x cubed plus ax square plus b. Okay. 2 field elements, x and y, coordinates actually in FQ, which define the finite point G of prime order in E to the FQ. So you have to, need a base point G, which has these coordinates. The order n of the point G, where n has to be larger than 2 to 256, and has to be larger than 4 times square root of Q. Okay. The cofactor H, which is not that important, but the number of points on this curve divided by n. Okay. So these are the domain parameters. So you initially choose this. Recall that in Bitcoin's elliptic curve, I showed you almost all of these values. Okay. Once you choose this, everybody who is going to use the system have to generate their keys, right? Public and private keys. So An elliptic curve digital signature algorithm key pair is associated with a particular set of elliptic curve domain parameters. The public key is a random multiple of the base point, while the private key is the integer used to generate the multiple. So think about it like this. You randomly choose a number, D, like in the algorithm. This will be your secret key. And you add the base point to itself D many times, and the resulting point is your public key. Okay. An entity A's key pair is associated with a particular set of elliptic curve domain parameters. All of these are mentioned in the previous slide. You know, Q, the field representation, AB, which are the values in the definition of the elliptic curve, G base points, and the number of points G generates, and so on and so forth. This association can be assured cryptographically, for example, with certificates, or by context. For example, all entities use the same domain parameters, and this is what we do in cryptocurrencies. Everybody is using the same domain parameters. So whenever somebody gives you a wallet address, you know actually exactly what you are going to do with it when you want to transfer money to it. So the entity must have the assurance that the domain parameters are valid prior to key generation. This is very, very important. So you have to check if these parameters are correct. Okay. So let's see what happens if you don't do it. Okay. So there was a very fantastic bug that discovered last year when I was teaching this course. So it turned out to be that in OpenSSL, there's an infinite loop in a function called bn mod square root. Okay. So this is a high severity problem. This is the CV number you can check. So it works like this. So this function, which computes a modular square root, contains a bug that can cause it to loop forever for non-prime moduli. What does this mean? So internally, this function is used when parsing certificates that contain elliptic curve public keys in compressed form or explicit elliptic curve parameter with a base point encoded in compressed form. It is possible to trigger the infinite loop by crafting a certificate that has invalid explicit curve parameters. So this means that you provide a certificate where you choose a elliptic curve there, where the parameters are actually not correct, because you use a non-prime modular. Since certificate parsing happens prior to verification of certificate signature, any process that parses an external supply certificate may thus be subject to a denial of service attack because you put the server in an infinite loop. The infinite loop can also be reached when parsing crafted private keys, as they can contain explicit elliptic curve parameters. So what are the vulnerable situations? So they include TLS clients consuming server certificates. So you're a client, you want to visit a web page or a server, they give you these false certificates, so they put you into an infinite loop. Or you can do the inverse. You can attack the server by doing the same thing, right? Also, these vulnerable situations include hosting providers taking certificates or private keys from customers, certificate authorities parsing certification requests from subscribers, anything else which parses elliptic curve parameters. This is a common notation they use. This is just shows the encoding. Also, any other application that use this function where the attacker can control the parameter values are vulnerable to this denial of service issue attack. Okay, so as you can see in academic papers or anywhere, we always write this. Okay, sorry, here we say that the entity A must have the assurance that the domain parameters are valid prior to key generation. So when you take a certificate, you should check if the parameters are correct. So if you parse it without checking, as OpenSSL did, a fantastic denial of service attack happens. Okay. So you have to be really applying these precautions we give. If we say a value has to be larger than 1, we really mean it. Don't allow it to be equal to 1. Okay. It is, yeah, you might say that it's a simple check to see if it is 1 or not, but in your code, you have to put it. Okay. So let me move on. So let's move on to key pair generation. So entity A does the following. You select a random or pseudo-random integer D in the interval 1 between n minus 1. Of course, if you choose 1, it wouldn't give you much security, right? Then what you do is compute Q equals to DG. So now let's look at what happens. G is the base point. If I'm going to calculate dg, this means that I'm adding the point G to itself D many times. Recall all of the point addition formulas we have. Then you end up with a point on the elliptic curve, Q, and this is your public key. Okay, so A's public key is this point Q, and A's private key is D. So this is what I mentioned when I talk about Bitcoin wallet addresses. So when you create a Bitcoin address, what you do is randomly choosing this D, calculating the DG, and obtaining this Q. And this point actually what you give to other people. So whenever somebody sends money to you, they are sending it to this point. Of course, this is represented in hexadecimal as a huge number. What you do is generally is to, first take SHA-256, then RIPE-MD 160. So this is why wallet addresses in Bitcoin are just 160 bits, but you do a special encoding there. But long story short, actually you are sending money to the point on the elliptic curve, and only the person who knows this D can claim the money. Okay. So let's look at how this signature generation works. To sign a message M, an entity A with domain parameters these and associated key pair D and Q does the following. So these steps are very similar to DSA algorithm. Only difference is that instead of working on a huge group, here you're working on an elliptic curve group. Okay. So you select a random or pseudo-random integer K, which is between 1 and m-1, and this has to be randomly selected for every message you are signing, and it has to be kept secret. As I mentioned before, if you sign two different messages with the same K, then your private key leaks. So this happened in the past. Somebody sent Bitcoin to somebody. Days later, they sent Bitcoin to somebody else. But there was a bug in the Java random number generator in the Android version. So that random number generator generated the same numbers for two different transactions. So short time later, he lost all of his money realized that all of the money are withdrawn from his account to somebody else. This is because somebody realized that they are using the same number. So people randomly, constantly checking if an account using the same random number or not all the time. So people are looking at the blockchain constantly to see if you make this mistake. And if you do, they withdraw all your money because they capture your private key. So we said that you chose a random K, then you compute KG. So again, this is elliptic curve operation. You are adding G to itself K many times. This is the main difference between the digital signature algorithm and elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. So you convert the coordinate x1 to an integer, x1 bar. So this documentation shows you how you convert the field element to an integer and come back, okay? And it is kind of simple. You compute R, which is x1 modulo n. If R is 0, then go to step 1 and do the same thing. Choose another K and repeat it, okay? If it is not 1, compute inverse of K modulo n. Compute your hash of your message and convert this bit string to an integer E. Compute S equals to K inverse times E plus dr modulo n. Again, if S equals to 0, go to step 1 and repeat it. If it is not, your signature is ready, which is R, this value, and S. Okay, as simple as that. So since I talked too much about cryptocurrency transactions, here M is the transaction you are signing, which says that you are sending this amount of cryptocurrency from these wallet addresses to these wallet addresses. Okay, so every actually cryptocurrency blockchain records this kind of signatures on the blockchain so that everybody can verify. So here I signed it. The signature is R and S. Now everybody should be able to verify it, right? I'm using D here, as you can see. So I know the secret key myself, and I use it when I sign it. So everybody should be able to verify it without knowing my secret key, but by knowing my public key Q. So what they do is as follows. To verify A's signature RS on M, B obtains an authentic copy of A's domain parameters, these, and associated public key Q. It is recommended that B also validates D and Q. B then does the following. So validate it before doing operations, unlike OpenSSL bug I just mentioned. Okay. So verifier does the following: verify that R and S are integers in this interval, compute the hash of the message yourself and convert it into an integer E, compute S inverse modulo N, since you received S from the signature, calculate E times W and R times W. Again, R is coming from the signature, E is the hash of the message. You obtain U1, U2. You compute the point on the elliptic curve again, but this time you compute it by U1 G plus U2 Q. G is the base point, Q is your public key. Okay? If X equals to the point of infinity, then you reject the signature. Otherwise, convert the X coordinate X1 of X to an integer X1 bar and compute X1 modulo N, which will give you V. And your final step is checking if V equals to R. So if it is, then you accept the signature. So this is exactly the same as digital signature algorithm. So you can go back and see why this works. There I explained in more detail. But the only difference is that group operations are like this. Here I'm working on points on the elliptic curve. There I was working on a multiplicative group, not an elliptic curve group. Okay. Proof that the signature verification works. If a signature RS on a message N was indeed generated by A, then we know that S equals to K inverse times E plus DR modulo N, right? So if we rearrange these values, this, multiply both sides with K. So K comes here and this cancel. Then multiply both sides with S inverse. This turns out that K is congruent to S inverse times E plus DR, right? But so if you multiply this like this, you'll end up with S inverse E plus S inverse RD. But this is exactly WED plus WRD. This is exactly U1 plus U2D modulo N. So that's, since the verifier calculates U1 G plus U2 Q, this actually gives you, U1 plus U2D times G, which is actually KG. And so V equals to R as required. Okay, so we're using some basic number theoretical arguments to see that this works.